At SheCan, we're building up the largest online library of women role models because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm really excited to be joined by CJ Bowry today. CJ, you have an OBE because you've set something up that's really amazing. You're the founder and CEO of Sal's Shoes, which you set up in 2013 and have done more than 10 years. You've distributed more than 4 million shoes to 59 countries. And you send outgrown, used but barely worn children's shoes to those in need. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, children's shoes are expensive. We all wear shoes. We wear shoes to protect our feet. They protect our feet from injury and infection, and in areas of low sanitation, the spread of infection. When my son Sal, who's now taller than me, but when he was a toddler and had started walking, I can still remember the shock at the price of his first pair of shoes. And very quickly, I had accumulated a whole bag full of his outgrown shoes that still had so much wear left in them because kids' feet grow so quickly. And I tried to contact some charities who distribute children's shoes. There are other charities. And they said, yes, they take them and they send them all over the world. And I said, brilliant, where will my sons go? And they couldn't tell me.
Mm.
And I just wanted to know, having paid for Sal's shoes, that another child would definitely receive them for free.
Yeah, amazing. CJ, so tell us a little bit more about this journey. How there's always two sides of the coin. There are challenges to overcome, there are successes to be celebrated. Tell us a bit more now. After 10 years, you've been doing this a really long time. What did you have to sort of overcome and how did you celebrate your successes?
Do you know, I think it's probably to do with mindset, even the term challenges. I never really meant to set up Sal's shoes.
Mm.
It wasn't part of a plan. It was something I ended up doing in my 30s, having already worked throughout my 20s and studied before that. And I think often if you don't have a plan, actually it just allows you to go with the flow. Um, and once I had made the decision to set it up, it very quickly snowballed. And I am fortunate, um, two ways really, actually. A, to be surrounded by just brilliant people with brilliant skill sets, and B, something I think I possibly always took for granted, but I have no problem asking for help.
Mm.
I am very aware of my limitations. I'm brilliant at lots of things, but I'm also aware of the things I'm not so brilliant at, and I have no problem asking for help. The worst anyone can say is no,
Yeah.
and that's fine. If they say no, you just ask somebody else.
Yeah. CJ, so tell us a bit more about those qualities that you have that you're so good at and that really serve you every day.
I think because Sal's shoes is so personal to me,
Mm.
it started with my son's first few pairs of shoes. It's named after him. And I think because it has been such a personal journey, I remain incredibly passionate about the work we do. And I think, I hope I see it's being proved that I think passion can be contagious.
Definitely. Definitely.
And and I think, you know, possibly when I talk about South Shoes, hopefully um, my passion around it is shared, and that's why and how other people jump on board.
So give us a little bit of your vision, CJ. Where are you at now and what are your plans for the future? What are the goals you still want to achieve?
My trustees ask me that every year at our strategy meeting. They say, okay, what are the goals for next year? And every single year I say, let's just keep doing what we do. We really still, in lots of ways, have no master plan, which actually means we can just roll with whatever comes our way, which is
Mm.
why we have ended up venturing out into so many different causes. We literally collect every single type of shoes. So it started with Sal's very first few pairs of shoes, so toddler shoes.
Mm.
And then people asked, well, what age, what size are you collecting? And I had to think about it. And I'm a UK adult size 6. but actually I have been since I was 11. So when I started secondary school, I was this height with this shoe size, and I was one of the tallest in my year. And by the time I finished school, I was one of the shortest because I hadn't grown at all. So we actually collect all sizes of shoes, and the surplus of larger shoes, we now work with soup kitchens and homeless shelters and refugees and asylum seekers. School shoes is now one of our biggest initiatives. Again, when I started the charity, I didn't really have any awareness of the significance of a pair of school shoes. But a lot of countries around the world have a state-run education system, as we do in the UK,
Yeah,
and education is free to access, but actually school uniform remains mandatory. And that means in a lot of countries, if you cannot afford a pair of school shoes, you cannot go to school.
absolutely.
There's a direct correlation between education and poverty. We need our younger future generations to be educated. It can be a way out of poverty for them. And actually, if that's just coming down to a pair of school shoes, in some instances, hopefully we're playing our part. I am realistic enough to think in my lifetime there will always be children who can't afford footwear.
Yeah,
But I also know that children will also outgrow them before they outwear them. So hopefully we'll just carry on doing what we're doing. Our stats have actually risen a bit from what you said. So we've now distributed over 5 million pairs in 65 countries around the
wow.
world.
Mm,
And I do feel I care a lot about the work we're doing in the UK at the moment.
yeah,
We had always worked in the UK. It was very important to me. It's very well, I think, supporting less privileged children in other countries, but actually there's children in the town I live going to school hungry every day. We're in the
yeah,
middle of a cost of living crisis. And last year, just in the UK, we distributed over 180,000 pairs of shoes in the
amazing.
country. And so I feel incredibly passionate about that. And we've also, over the last few years, we now have 11, soon to be 13 Sal shoe shops. Um, in existing community spaces. I think, I can remember my most favorite pair of shoes as a child, and shoe shopping was exciting, and you got to choose your shoes. And I think often when you're in a position of poverty, actually, that choice is the first thing to go.
Yeah,
And it's a slight loss of dignity. So hopefully, our shoe shops look like shoe shops and feel like shoe shops, and you can try on and choose the shoes you'd like, but you don't have to pay for the footwear that you need.
yeah, I love that, CJ. And I still remember mine, and I think it's the first choice a small child makes by themselves is choose their shoes because they don't necessarily choose their clothes, but they'll choose their shoes.
Absolutely. And even young children have a very definite idea of what suits them.
Yeah.
And, we make dozens and dozens of choices about all sorts of things every single day.
Mm.
And those choices define us, they define our very being. And I think often when you're in a position of poverty, it's those choices that are the first to go.
Yeah, definitely. CJ, how impressive is that? Tell us a little bit more about your organization for someone who has an idea, wants to set up a venture in the charity sector. What tips would you give them? But also, how do you organize it from an organizational point of view?
My advice would be just do it and just rally everybody in helping to get it off the ground. Literally within the first week, I decided, I was going to set up this charity. I just reached out to everybody I knew. So a friend of mine is a graphic designer. He designed our logo.
Mm,
A friend of mine works in IT, so he set up our website and our social media pages. Um, friends who worked at schools or in sort of soft play cafes for children hosted the first Sal Shoes collections where people could drop off shoes.
mm,
And the brilliant thing about social media, I have older children now who I'm constantly speaking to about the dangers of social media. In fact, they're not allowed social media. But when harnessed for good, social media can be astounding.
yeah,
And I think because we've managed to maintain the premise on which I started the charity, which is that we know where every single pair of Sal shoes is walking again. And I think because we follow our shoes until they find their new feet, and we tell stories about their new owners or about the children who've donated them, Doing good feels good. Charity can actually be quite selfish.
Yeah.
And I think when people recognize their shoes, or a parent sees where the effort and cost of sending their children's shoes to us has gone, it can only encourage you to want to help us more.
Definitely. CJ, and how have you organized Sell Shoes from an organizational point of view? How do you get people on board, and how do you keep them excited, and how do you ask people for their time?
I believe the vast majority of us want to do good. We just don't always get round to it. We're busy.
Yeah.
If a friend rings you and says they're not very well, the chances are you'll probably think about them later in the day. But
Mm.
whether you actually get round to offering any help or support. But if a friend rings you and says, "Oh, I'm really not well, could you please walk my dog this evening at 5 o'clock?" Straight away, they're giving you a direct opportunity to help them. And the chances are, if you're free, you'll say, "Yes, of course I can,"
Yeah.
because it's a direct plea for help. Um, we are very direct and specific about what we're asking for. We want shoes that are either new or have been outgrown but have plenty of wear left in them. We want you, and that's whether it's an individual sending one pair of shoes or a company sending 20,000 pairs of shoes. We want you to pay to get them to us,
Yeah.
because actually we remain a relatively small charity in monetary terms. So
Mm.
there is no point in us having a warehouse full of shoes if
Yeah.
we don't have the money to be able to pass them on. So
Yeah.
we spend the funding we do have on getting those shoes to their new owners. And when I started the charity, I was obviously working elsewhere. So I was in a position, fortunately, of not having to draw a salary.
Mm.
But actually, our work's not sustainable if we're not paid. And
Absolutely.
the fact is, if something happens to me or my trustees choose, they need to replace me and they need to pay that person.
Yeah.
But we remain a very small paid team.
Yeah.
I feel quite passionately about keeping our overheads very low, so that actually our money really is spent on doing what we do. So we have a very small part-time team of 6,
Mhm.
and everybody else is volunteers.
Yeah. Amazing. CJ, so tell us a little bit, what if you had a wand and you could change one thing, what would that be?
In terms of our work,
Yeah.
funding across the sector, but especially in the small charity sector. And I think increasingly small charities are carrying the load. The burden is very much on us, because we are working within communities,
Yeah.
and we do really know those families most in need. But the cost of living crisis is across the board, so that includes in the charity sector.
Yeah.
And I think if you took away the funding worries of a lot of organisations, actually all they could do is just more work and better work, and without the stress behind the scenes. People who follow us on social media will see all these lovely stories and shoes setting off and being sent off, but actually there's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes just to ensure our sustainability.
Yeah. CJ, so tell us a bit more about your funding strategy. How do you fund?
We ask, if people are in a position to, that they donate £1 a pair.
Okay. Yeah.
Shoes they send us. At the end of the day, really all we're doing is recycling shoes. We're finding them new feet, but it has to be cost effective.
Yeah.
So we work on the basis of £1 a pair. If we're sending 20,000 pairs of shoes to children living on a rubbish dump in Nicaragua, that doesn't cost us £20,000.
Mm.
What it means is, if we want to send 200 pairs of shoes to a really small village school in rural Africa, it balances out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're actually asking our donors for quite a lot. We're asking them to have a route about at home for their outgrown shoes. We're asking them to give their shoes a quick clean so that
Mm.
we can get them sent straight off.
Mm.
We're asking them to pay and go to the effort of sending their shoes to us. And
Yeah.
then we're also asking them, if they can, to donate £1 a pair. And we also, obviously, continuously throughout the year are applying to foundations and grant making bodies for funding.
And that's really big work. I remember I've been running a charity also for 2 decades, and it's really the hardest job to apply to those big foundations. It takes up an enormous amount of time. More often than not, it's not successful. So, how do you deal with those setbacks, and how do you motivate your team to keep going?
My advice recently to a lot of sort of small charities who have been starting out and have sort of sought some tips from me actually has been, as soon as you're in a position to pay somebody, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
We have a grant writer. She works 2 days a week, and that is just solidly head down at her desk writing applications for us. It costs money to make money.
Yes, absolutely.
And when you're starting out, actually, you just don't have that money to spare. But the time spent doing it when it pays off is so worth it. And actually, it's sort of, when you are awarded grants, it almost validates your work
Mm,
to other people awarding money. They think, oh, so and so have funded them, and so have funded them. But it is, especially, I mean, for larger charities, they have, they'll have several full-time grant writers on their team. It's incredibly time consuming, but I would, once charities are in a position, to make that one of your first paid positions.
yeah. CJ, so what was the most difficult decision you ever had to take in those 10 years or more than 10 years?
It's a very good question. Uh, do you know, I am an eternal optimist. I I I do just go with the flow. I think the brilliant thing with a small organization is often you don't have the red tape and bureaucracy
Mm,
of a larger organization. So actually, when there are trickier decisions to be made, or a hurdle comes up, you just think, okay, how do we get around this? How do we get over it? And you just keep going.
CJ, thank you so much for telling this really inspiring story and incredible what you have achieved, and so exciting to see you continue.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.